Hey, welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith. And in today's workshop, we're going to look at some SQL best practices and some tips and tricks to make your app more performant and take advantage of some of those more advanced SQL functions. So we're going to do some things on the server that you would otherwise have to use JavaScript for and make it a little easier to just get back the data exactly as you need it instead of having to transform it. All right, let's check it out. All right, we're going to build on top of this table. It's just a real simple start to an app. I've got a select query. It's a big data set though. There's 2 million records. So it's a good example that we can use for charting because there's like multiple columns here that we could group by the item type or the priority and then do like aggregate or sub reports, group by one of those and then get the totals. So it's a good data set for stuff like that. You'll notice that the column names, let's check out the actual data here. The column names have spaces and uppercase characters. Now, today I want to cover a few best practices, and this is not one. Having those type of column names makes it a little more difficult to write your queries because you have to use quotes around anything that's uppercase or case sensitive, and if it has spaces. So I would advise against using column names like that. However, when that's how it is, when that's what you have to work with, right? It's good to know this stuff. So I'm using this data set because it's got some good columns that we can chart, and it's going to kind of force us to have to use those quotes and show how that stuff works. So first thing that I want to do is let's go back to the UI. And let's say you're filling out this form and you want this item type here to have a select widget, a drop down of all of the available item types. So we'll go to that field here on the item type on the JSON form into the item settings. And if I change this to a select, it shows you that it should be an array with options of label and value. It's an object, so your option object for each option has a label and a value, and they can be the same. A lot of times you'll have like an ID and then a person's name or email. Um, for this case, it would be the same. We just need to get an array with all of the available item types. And you could try to like hard code type this right here. But we should set this up so it's dynamic with a query that if we added a new item type, it would just populate and it would exist here in the dropdown. So first thing I'm going to do is go over to a new query. We're going to create another select query from our sales table. And I'm actually going to use the shortcut down here. While we're talking about best practices and stuff, just want to show some of the options here. So I have a table called sales. If I search here, you'll see this little plus, and I can insert a select query so that it puts in like the right format for that table, and it automatically sets a limit there so you don't get everything on a large table. It doesn't add much there on a select, but if you look at the insert or update, it's actually inserting all of these column names for you, adding the quotes to handle the ones that are uppercase or have spaces, the whole list of values here with placeholders. So it definitely saves you a lot of time there. I would definitely advise using, this to start an insert or update query. Select and a delete are simple enough, you might not need it. But anyway, let's go back to the select. So from the sales table here, I don't just want all the fields here. Let's get only the item type. And you'll see that if I run this without the quotes, I'm going to get an error because two things, right? Like it says column item does not exist instead of item type. So it's also lowercase though. So the way the database is receiving this, interpreting it, if you want something to be case sensitive or have spaces, you have to have quotes around it. And it's double quotes for table or column names, and then single quotes if you're talking about a string, like you're inserting a value. So let's see if this works now. And we are getting a list. I'm getting only 10 because I have the limit set. So, like I said, there are 2 million records in this table. I don't want to select all of them. That's not the right approach to do the limit that way. What we need to use is select distinct. So I can take the limit off as long as I set some other kind of limit there. I know it would just time out with this massive data set. So we can use select distinct, and then we'll get that one field from sales. Okay, now we have 12 records, so we're getting close. Um, coincidentally, I think that might be, yeah, it looks like they're just happens to already be in alphabetical order. However, it's probably not going to be that way in your data set. So I want to add in an order by, and we will use that same field, item type. Not going to look any different in our case because it just happened to be sorted already. But if you're generating a drop down, select widget, then it's a good idea to have that ordered. So this is pretty close. It's almost the format that we need. Let's look at the JSON version. So we have an array of objects, but the field name is item type, and it should be label and value for the select. Inside of a table widget, it's looking for that specific format. So we're almost there. I can rename this. Select distinct item type as label. And that's going to give us back the same data, but change that header or the property name to label. And then if you wanted to select a second field, like one is the label and one is the value, if you want to use an ID and an email or something like that, you would just add a comma and then select the other field as value. In this case, they're both going to be the same. So this will give me back a JSON array where there's the two properties, and then you can just swap out that field name here if you had a separate ID from the label. So we'll call this get item types. And if you did happen to add a new type to your database, this query will return all of them and the drop down will update. So way better than hard coding it. Now let's go back to this item type, and right here we can reference that query, get item types data, and we'll want to make sure that runs on page load. It just set it for us. You'll see this pop up here. It says that that query is going to run on page load now. So this setting was turned on because we tried to display it in the UI. All right, next we're going to check out some charting options. So the easiest way is this bind data button. If you're looking at a query response here, you can use this to easily connect it to a table or a select widget like we just did with the other query. So I'm going to try out the chart, but these column types, these column names with the spaces, I think are going to be an issue. And yeah, the identifier sold. Let's see which column it's trying to map right now. I think we have the units sold here. If I just put quotes around this, and then instead of using dot notation for the object, we use bracket, so get rid of the period there. Okay, so back to best practices. I use this data set. It's kind of a good bad example. It's highlighting these issues you're going to run into if you have spaces or uppercase characters in your SQL, like column names, table names. So you'll want to use those quotes in the SQL query when you're referencing any fields that have spaces. We did have one here on the item type, yeah. So it creates a problem or an extra thing that you have to consider when you're writing your SQL and on the JavaScript. It's a different syntax to correct it, but it's kind of the same issue. So just something to be mindful of when you're designing a new database, if you have the option to set those field names yourself. A lot of times, though, you're just working with the system that was there before. That's what you have to work with. So good to know how to handle that stuff. All right, back to our chart. So let's take a look at the code and see how this is connected to the chart widget. If you scroll down, all it does is map over your data and then return the label as X and the number or value for, in this case, it's using the units sold for the Y value. And that might be what you want if your query is set up to return like a total or a average or whatever for that column. But if this is just a select query like I'm using here, this is not an aggregate query at all. It's just 100 records, the first 100, right? So I'm not getting the totals. There's a bunch of others for each country and each item type that are missing. And it's just taking that and turning it into a chart. But what you really want to do is write your query to get all those totals and put that on the server. So let it figure out the average or the sum, and then return the data in a format that's ready to go to the chart. So like I said, the easiest way to get that query connected is just that bind data button, and it will rename these for you if needed. But we could just write our query to return exactly this format and have everything totaled. All right, so let's delete this chart, and we're going to write a new query first, and then we'll get a chart based on that. So we'll do another new SQL here, and what I'm going to do is get the sum. We want to get 2 columns, so we'll get the item type and then the sum of units sold. I think that's how it was spelled. And this is the public table, or sales rather, public schema. Item type. Right. If we use an aggregate like this, then we have to also add a group by clause. Yeah. Column item type must appear in the group by clause. Oh, right. Wrong column. This is the one that I want to group by. Okay. So we have 12 records again. So that looks right. If we were just getting the first 100, right, we'd have a type and a number and a type and a number and then 100 of them. So we're down to 12, which matches this query, the get item types. So we'll call this item type report. And if you look at this data, it's pretty close to the chart now on the JSON here. We have a label and then a numeric value that we can chart, but the labels are wrong. If we connect this, we can go ahead and try it. If we connect this to a chart now, same issue because of the space in the column name. So we'll fix that real quick. Instead of that, we'll use quotes in the bracket notation, and then we don't need that dot. All right. And this data set is all the numbers are equally distributed. So in that regard is not the best example. I do like the having a large data set of stuff to chart and the column names, so that we have that space issue here to show that example. But yeah, they're all equally distributed. So let's see. This is taking our query and it's mapping over it on the client side and relabeling everything as X and Y. So if we just get rid of that and I have the data coming straight from the query, it's still an array of objects, but now the field names, we don't have an X and a Y. And so the chart is looking for that X and Y series and it's not able to connect the two. So rather than use JavaScript though, let me undo that. We're getting some data back. And now that we have it, have to map over it again, right? It's inefficient. We can have this returned with the name X and Y. We can do that right in the query, save some overhead, and the client side has less to do, and we're using the server to do that. So we're going to select item type as X, and then the sum of units sold as Y. So we get the same data, just different labels. And I'm going to try it. I think this is redundant. I think it's going to try to rename it anyway. Let's see what the code does. Yeah. So it doesn't even need to rename it, but it's just automatically mapping over it and renaming X to X and Y to Y. Pretty sure we can just take this off now. And it still works. So a minute ago, with the wrong labels, it needed that extra map. It's not smart enough to realize that I went ahead and renamed things to X and Y already, so we didn't need that extra map there. But yeah, that if you had, hundreds or thousands of rows and, multiple charts in your app, that's really going to slow it down. You don't want to get all the raw data and then have to map over each one separately on the client side. So just rename that stuff in your SQL query. All right, next let's check out filters. So the table widget has this filter tool built in, and it's pretty cool. It's useful. It's got a bunch of different options for each column type. If you select a date, then it's go looking at before or after. And if you select a number, it's greater than or less than. Or for strings, then you've got contains or starts with. So things like that. It looks at the data type and it helps you come up with that filter. But this is all happening on the client side after the query runs, after you get whatever subset. And in our case, we're getting 100 records. So it's going to filter whatever they have to start with. But if you want this server side, if you want them to be able to filter by a certain column and then pass that value into the query, that's what we're going to set up here. And we already have a query to give us that unique list of item types. So I'm going to use that with a select widget. And then I'm going to set this widget. Let's see, let's move the label over there. We can set the source data to reference our query that we already have for all the item types. Oh, and I have to connect it to the field names. There we go. So we already had the query. It's already an array of an object with a label and a value. So we can take the selected option now, once the user picks one of these, and pass that value into the query. So let's go back here and we're going to start a new query. Had something else there I was working on a minute ago. We're going to use this to select, and we'll select all fields from sales. Getting some lag here. From sales, where, and then we're going to look at the item type. Is equal to, and then we have that select widget that I just added. Select one dot text selected option. So we're using prepared statements, and it evaluates and inserts that value, the string from the selected option there. So we will call this get item, select items. And let's go back to the UI now. I'm going to make that query run whenever the user changes this dropdown. So what we'll do is connect there's an action here at the bottom on dropdown change. And I'm going to connect that to the query select items. I think I need to put a limit on this as well. All right, we'll go ahead and run this. And you can see that it's only getting that one item type, beverages. So if we go back to the UI, and we'll change this to cereal. Oh, but I'm not showing that table here. We're still showing the other query that gets everything. So we'll change this to our select items. And now that's been set to run on page load, just like the other query. So every time we change this category now, it's rerunning the query and passing in that selected option here. So you could combine multiple select widgets, and maybe you have them pick the region and the country and an item type, and then reference all three of those in the query. And that's a much better way to handle a large data set, to let the user filter which ones they want first. And then if you still have to paginate on top of that, you can. But if you give them the right filters like that, then hopefully they can get the full set of results they're looking for. So whenever the user changes this drop down, it'll rerun the query and get just that item type. But what happens when we clear it? Remove the value, it reruns the query, but then it's not returning anything. So let's go back and check this out, see how we can make this work either way. Right now it says where item type equals, and then it looks at the select one, selected option value. We want to see if there's a value in there. So we'll have an OR condition. We'll reference the same field again. So I'm going to copy this, get this out of the way, and I think I'm just going to move this to a new line. So we have our where this is true, or this equals, and then just an empty string. Let's see if this works and make sure that it is empty. Yeah, so I don't have an option set right now. We'll run the query again. Okay, zero length delimiter and identified. So maybe right here we say null instead of empty. Oh, right. In SQL, at least with Postgres, it's single quotes for a string. Double quotes are for table and column names like this. So here, I think this should work. Yeah. Now, it works when it's empty. Let's try it from the UI again, just to make sure. Select a value, and it's getting only that type. And then when we clear it, it gets everything. So you can combine this with multiple select widgets if you want. They could pick an item type and then drill down and pick a region and just reference that as an extra condition in the query. All right, what can we do next? Okay, let's look at some charting stuff again. Now we have a bunch of different columns that we could chart on, but we don't have just a year. We've got like an order date and a ship date, I think. There's two different dates in here. But you might want to like aggregate it by just the year. So we could do that with JavaScript. We could map over the data and figure out what year a certain date falls in. But again, anytime you can do this stuff on the server, you should write the query to give you back the exact data that you need, instead of having to do all that with JavaScript on the client side. Now, if you're working with API, a lot of times all you can do is get the records. You don't have those aggregate functions available, so you have to do it with JavaScript, and that's fine if that's your only option. But what we want to do is get a chart that's showing for the certain year, what's the total for each item type. So let's go back to our query. I'm going to add a new query. Okay, and I'm going to use that shortcut again here for the sales table to insert a select. We'll run that. And we only want to get that one column first. I want to get the date part working right to where we can select it as a year. So let's look at the order date. And now we're only getting that one date field, which is actually a string. This is not stored as a date. So it makes it a little tougher to do these aggregate queries and get just the date. But next, what I want to do is say select, and then instead of order date, we're going to, so what we're going to use here, instead of just the order date column, we use select extract, and then I think it's year from field. So let's see if this works. Okay, it is giving the year, but it's calling it extract. So let's say as year, and if I want that to be capital, I think I should put some quotes on it. Maybe not. Let's try with out. Double quotes. So you do need the quotes for it to see it as case sensitive, but field names are double. There it is. So now it is extracting just the year, and we're renaming it as year. And I wanted to get that part working before we go trying to do an aggregate query on top of this value. So we have that. Now we'll do region. And region is also case sensitive because it's uppercase. Let's see, we're getting back 100, and this still isn't aggregating anything yet. So we're going to keep hitting our limit and getting 100. But now let's get the sum of, let's see, total profit. Let's see what this does. All right, new error. We're trying to do a sum on a string. So if I look at the raw sales data, all these prices, they're actually just a string. It's not stored as a number or a decimal. So back to our query here. To use sum on this, I'm going to have to cast it as a number. We'll pull that out of there. Cast this field as numeric. Oops. As numeric. There it is. So now we have an aggregate column. And now we're getting a different error. It says that we have to use the order date in the group by. So now that we have a total, it's like, which field do you want to show that subtotal for? We have the year here. We're calling it year. So we need to add a group by. And then I'm calling it year. I'm not sure if I can reference it this way, or we might have to redo the extract again. Sales region. So it fixed that error. Now it says sales region must be in the group by. Okay. And we got back 77 records. So it's not hitting our limit of 100. It is aggregating, which I think means there are 77 unique combos of year and region in this data set. So let's see. We have a year repeating, but a different region. And then it goes through the next year in the region. So yeah, there's like 77 combos of those. And then we have a sum for each one. So you could do all this with JavaScript, get the raw data and then map over all that stuff. And, you know, I love JavaScript and would probably have fun doing that. But if you can do this on the server, this is the best practice here. Converting the type and aggregating the year here. And then we're getting back some data that we could chart. Now what this is, this has 3 columns. So if you did want to chart this, you might pick, you know, what year you want to look at, and then have this as the X and the sum as the Y. Or you could go the other way and like let the user pick which region that they want to look at, and then use the year for the X and the sum for the Y. We could rename that stuff here, just like we did before. Could rename this as X and Y. So that's totally up to you. Like this use case here, you could be passing in a select widget for which field. And then the second one, you know, is always region, but they get to pick the year or vice versa. So lots of different options there. Let's see, we should name this one year report. All right, so I think that's it for this workshop. I hope this was helpful. If you have anything else with SQL or any other ideas for workshops, feel free to mention it on Discord. You can comment on the video below. All right, thanks again for joining. We'll see you next week, and don't forget to subscribe.